All right. We're here with Michele Root-Bernstein, and having an interview with her is a pleasure because she is also my teacher. She's the person who teaches me haiku right now. I tell people, pray for her. She has a tough job, but we met a long time ago, Cradle of American Haiku in person, but I'm familiar with your work and I've been reading it almost from the beginning, particularly your haibun. And so the time that we've spent in meeting monthly for the last 5 years, I think it's been, with Evergreen Haiku, I wanted to make sure other people got the opportunity to meet and learn from you. Tell us a little bit. This is the opening question everybody gets. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, and what kind of a life you lead when you're not writing haiku.
Oh, when I'm not writing haiku. Well, I was going to say, first of all, that I'm a kind of a late bloomer as a poet. My training was all very academic. I was going to be an historian of 18th century France, way back when, and got kind of derailed by life, of course. And so I ended up initially doing a lot of, not so much academic, but of popular prose writing about things. I was doing it with my husband. We turned to creativity studies. It was kind of where we could come together. I met him in graduate school. I was training an historian in history, and he was training as an historian of science. But then he morphed into a scientist and has pursued a career in academia as a scientist, but he was doing this history of science stuff, which I thought was intriguing, but I didn't know that much about science. But that's how we got into creativity studies, because what he was doing on the side now with his old history of science stuff was trying to figure out how scientists discover, and that led into thinking about, big questions in creativity. How do people create? What is it? And there's a lot of people out there writing. We were coming into the field not trained as psychologists, which most people who study creativity are coming out of that field. So we felt we had a different point of view, perhaps. And so, long story short, I eventually, started thinking, well, if I'm going to do creativity studies, maybe I should try to be creative, in something artistic, is essentially. I mean, I felt a need somehow, although I hadn't really, as a young person, hadn't the opportunity to explore the artistic side of myself. Because of the creativity studies, I said, maybe I should do this. And I had a role model in my husband, who's always done various art projects, and his family is quite artistic as well as being scientific. So anyway, I tried writing a lot of different things. I don't even know if I can remember all the things I tried. After I got my PhD and I had written about popular theater in the French Revolution, I thought, oh, well, I'll write a play about this, this period. And so I wrote a very bad play, and that's in the drawer somewhere. And then I decided I would write a novel, and that turned out to be pretty bad too, but that was also set in 18th century France. But you see, what I was doing was trying to unlearn all the things I had learned about thinking and linear thinking and whatever. So I had to unlearn a lot of stuff in order to let these artistic energy just come out, I guess is the way to say it. Anyway, I tried that. I tried children's books for a long time, writing little children's books. Didn't go anywhere with that, really. And then I kind of tried haiku because I said, well, maybe I should. Well, my story about haiku is interesting, actually. Do you want to hear it?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So when my kids were very young, and I was, stay-at-home mom, so I was doing a lot of things with them. And one thing we would do is play around with words and fool around with words and write little poems. This is starting when, as soon as they could talk, I'd write down everything they said practically. So that kind of turned into writing little things with them. Of course, I thought, haiku, they're little, right? So I would do haiku and stuff like that with my children. Of course, at that point, I'm doing 575, and I didn't know much about it. But I was intrigued. I liked working with the small forms, and there were a few others that we fiddled around with. And I also ended up teaching little workshops for the kids over in the elementary school, the local elementary school. So I got kind of into poetry through working with children. And I liked these small forms a lot. And I learned a lot from preparing for these classes. You know, I would read this and that. And Kenneth Koch and people like that had some great ideas for how to reach young people. And he was reaching me too. So so at some point I had enough poems. I thought, oh, these are pretty good. I think I'll send them off to, where did I send them? Modern Haiku. This was like in the late 90s. So I sent a batch, and it was Bob Spees was still the editor, and he took one, and I was thrilled. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun, you know. And so I got one published. I think it was 1998, and then I sent him some more. And he said, no, thank you. And it was fun actually conversing with him. He was reading one of the books that I had written with my husband. And he liked that a lot, but he didn't like any of the haiku that I was working on. So the point was, I didn't know what I had done in the one haiku that he took. I had no clue really why he took that one. So I ended up kind of dropping things for a while, but then later when I was working on children's books, I met a woman through that who was getting everything, lots of things published in haiku journals, and that was Kay Grimness, a Michigan haiku poet who left writing haiku. I don't think she's participated in the community for a long time, but she's the one who got me back into it, because I said, you've gotten published, you know, and I said, I was kind of like asking her to be my mentor. And we would, because we were meeting kind of regularly for the children's books, I would say, would you look at these haiku? So basically what I got from her though was basically, here's a list of haiku journals. You know, you start at the top, but there's a whole long list, like 10 or something.
Yeah.
And you send out your poems, and when they come back, you don't even think about it. You just send them out to the next one. And she kind of made it like a game, you know, you send them out, you send them out, you send them out.
It is a game.
Well, yeah. So that, but the point to me was to play. It was more like, let's play with this. And I could have knocked myself on the head, because, you know, one of the books I wrote with my husband, we were talking about imaginative skills, and play is one of them. And it was like, duh, you know, I should just play with this and see where it takes me. So I always remember Kay for getting me back on the road. And then, you know, within, I think I started, you know, placing in the journals lower on the list were taking my work, and then I slowly would inch them up. But the interesting thing about this whole period was I was basically, except for Kay, whom I saw occasionally, I was in the dark. I was working by myself, and the only feedback I got was whether a poem was accepted or not accepted. So it was slow. It was very slow, but I read things I could find. You know, at first I started, of course, with the Haiku Handbook, of course, or maybe I shouldn't say of course, but that's where I started. And then I actually went to a haiku meeting for the first time and found out that, oh, this is a lot of fun. I was dreading it. I thought, oh, the people are going to be so mean, you know, because I'm nobody and I don't know what I'm doing. But that was just not the case in the haiku community. People welcome you with open arms. You don't know what you're doing. We don't know what we're doing either. Come on, you know. So there I met for the first time, I met Lee Gerga, and I bought his book. And I think this is like the most terrific how-to book in the world.
I totally agree with you. That is where people should start, because Lee's done two things. He's kept it simple in terms of his descriptions, and I don't mean uncomplex. He tackles all the subjects you need to tackle, but he also has excellent examples.
Absolutely.
Something to deal with. And so you know, I'll give that book to anybody who's interested in haiku, because I think it's fantastic. Yeah, you're right on.
I start with.
And Bill Higginson and Penny, they wrote
Yeah,
the book.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, I guess I don't know if that's the end of my story, but then I just got more and more, I was getting more and more mm, publications, but then I realized at some point that I was, really isolated. So I started going to conferences. I think the first one I went to was an HNA, and I loved it. I loved it. I mean, I was frightened and all that stuff, but people were just so generous and so fun, and so I thought, oh, that's not so bad. And then I went to some. I started going to the Mineral Point
Yeah.
American Cradle, and those were terrific. Of course, that's a very small conference. And I met you, and I met Francine, and I met a slew of people there, and then that was it. Then I was just hooked. Like, I have to go to as many conferences as I can. One or two a year would be good, and that was because I needed to reach out. I needed more feedback, or and the energy you get from being with other people who are interested in the same esoteric thing that you're interested in.
Yeah. And the other thing is that I think people, when you start haiku, you think it's just this little poem. It's very simple. And as you've experienced, and I've certainly experienced, it's a lot harder than people think
Oh,
to,
absolutely.
to take an experience in your life and distill it down to under 17 syllables. It it is a craft, Paul Miller. But HNA, I want to explain to people who don't know, is Haiku North America. And although it's North America, people come from all over the world. Uh, Kalaramesh from India and Ron Moss from Australia have been. People come from all over. And that is an excellent meeting. It's every 2 years.
Right.
And this year, a little commercial for HNA, it's going to be virtual
Yeah.
because of COVID. Was supposed to be in British Columbia, and you can't go across the border, so sort of kill that idea. Uh, but it's a great opportunity for people who aren't familiar with it. I found that the Zoom meetings for CBEC and others are just as exciting. Have you had that experience too?
Yeah, I don't know how exciting they would be for a newcomer. I don't know, but for someone who's feels pretty comfortable already, the Zoom has been a godsend, I think. Um,
Well, I
and
think I would say
I mean,
one.
because we can keep meeting and exchanging and reading haiku and thinking about haiku, even though we can't come together. It's
I
been
think the
great.
one thing for a newcomer, though, with Zoom, and I could be wrong. It depends on the person. You can hide.
Well, that's true. You can just listen. And in fact, with our, we'll talk about this later, but on the Evergreen Zoom, Evergreen Haiku, this local group we have that you're a member of too, um, we have a couple of people who just want to lurk. They just want to listen. And they're serious about it. They do.
Mhm.
They come every time, but they just want to listen because, well, that's where they are with that, and that's great.
Yeah, and I think that then that gets us to if you want to find work that has been published and she's won contests, Michelle is sort of understating uh, a little bit her successes. I mean, she's been published, or she's been published in Modern Haiku, in Frogpond, in uh, she's the contest by HSA for haibun. Uh, and her work's been published everywhere, Acorn, any number of places. You have been made the rounds now pretty successfully. And the one thing that I understand about your work is that I like about it. That's a good thing. You're studying creativity, but you're also exhibiting it. Her work can move
Mhm.
in different directions. Am I right? You've
Well,
been.
I guess what I would say is that one thing that I adore about working in haiku is I'll spend some time, getting some aspect of it under my belt, and then that could take months or years. And then I'll say, okay, I'll look around and say, what else can I do? And so I'm very interested in experimental. I hesitate to use that word, but I mean tweaking and working with, if you figure you have a few basic ideas of what you want to do with a haiku, how else can you do that? That's always interesting to me. So I'm constantly, well, I'll read any how-to book that comes down the line, and then, people writing essays about how you do this or that. I just adore anything that has to do with how do you do something, and how do you think about it. And then I read people's work, and if I like, and here's another thing, if I like a poem, if some poem blows me away, or say some haibun or something, then I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what is it they're doing. What did they do here? Can I do it too? I guess that brings me to, I've written a few essays on that kind of dovetail my creativity studies with my haiku. And one of them was called Copying to Create, how to something or other, emulation, and the role of emulation in haiku. And I'm a big proponent of learning by copying. And I mean, obviously when you're writing, copying can't mean you're just copying, because you can't just take someone's words and say they're your words. But you can try to copy what's going on in that poem. And there are many, many layers of that. And so I think I'm still learning every day, and I learn from other poets whom I admire. I just try to figure out, what is it? Why did I really like this poem? How did it do it? Can I do it too? Can I do it in a slightly different way so no one will know that I'm copying? That kind of thing. And so it's constantly pushes you in new directions. It does.
You published, in fact, well, pardon me, you presented at HNA back several years ago, just exactly you basically had a discussion about your essay. And
yes, I presented it first and then wrote it into an essay. Yeah.
Two things that I think help people to absorb that thought is, first of all, we all talk about the masters, and Basho was a great one for stealing lines from ancient Waka to Chinese poems, Lai Po. He didn't have any problem at all taking a line and what I call riffing on it, which is the same thing. And the other thing is that I think that you're hitting on, that people need to hammer on, I wish you'd elaborate, is that when you see something that works for someone else, it's not a sin to say, hey, I could get away with that too. When I saw Marlene Mountain writing one-line haiku, I realized I could get away with it too. You have the same experience?
Oh, sure. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you see a one-liner and think, oh, and then some one-liners, and everyone's different, right? So I'll read some one-liners. I'm like, no, I don't get it. It doesn't work for me. Why not? What's missing? And then the ones that do. And so, and then, you'll see it's not always form, but I mean, recently, I should say, one of my other, I really, besides his book, Lee's book, he's been a real mentor to me. We were exchanging haiku for a while, and I think I have to applaud his persistence or whatever. I think he might have been quite frustrated with me because I wasn't always ready to hear or to learn what he was doing. But it creeps up on me slowly. Oh yeah, now I get it, later. But that's the learning curve. You learn, you finally get what somebody or something is presenting to you when you're ready to. So, but like, for instance, he does a lot of experimenting, and lately he's been working with, actually, in a way, taking the one-liner and like stringing it down the page, but not just that way, but clustering words, not randomly, but clustering them so that they work. Sometimes when it works the best, it's working somewhat against the sense of the language, so that you have to read it in more than one way, or you can read it in more than one way.
Yeah, Jim Cage does the same thing.
Yeah, so I look at that and I think, oh, I love this. When it works, it's just incredible. So yeah, so I start trying to think, can I do something like this too? but I don't want to look exactly like Lee. So what can I do? You know, I mean, how is this going to work? Anyway, that's an example of how I get stimulated. I mean, and I think we all do, how we
Yeah.
get stimulated by what other people are doing, which is why being in community is so important.
Yeah.
I think, for me anyway, it is.
Oh, it is. I mean, the when you started Evergreen Haiku, which is a group out of Michigan State University, we should say that they were kind enough to give you space and give you some support in the project. When you started that 5 years ago, I came because I was trying to support you and show up, and I'm totally addicted. I can't miss. And
That's wonderful.
you think, and I tell people this, and I think here's a spot I'd like you to take off on is people often say, I'm not the poetic type, or I am not the creative person, or I can't paint, or whatever. And I think when you say those kinds of things, you're basically building a wall for yourself. How do people break out of that habit of saying, well, poetry is not for me, I don't understand it, and getting to the point where you're writing it? You did it, I did it, and I don't know anybody who hasn't gone through the process. But you and your husband have studied creativity. How do you get there?
First of all, I think there has to be some desire in you somewhere to do something. I like to think of what pushes me is not so much I want to write poetry, but that the initial thing is I want to make something. Maybe I don't quite know what it is yet, but I want to make. There's this desire to make. And that has a lot to do with making meaning, making personal meaning out of existence and stuff like that. So don't need to go into that necessarily, the psychology of why, but you assume that someone they have a need to make, they want to make something. So then they try things, and for whatever reason, oh, that seems like, you know, I might be interested in that, I might not be interested in this other thing. So I think with, say, if someone thinks, well, maybe I'd like to write haiku. So yeah, they begin the process of learning what it is, fooling around with their own, and hopefully in a supportive environment, because, you know, I mean, nobody does anything perfectly right off the bat. Nobody anywhere, not even a child. So I think when you're talking about adults coming to something, and you know, in the haiku community is often adults coming to it, whether it's because they're retired and have the time, or they just need something else in their life. I'm a real big proponent of avocations, and always having something else to do, not just work, work, work. And I'm also a big proponent of what I might call the amateur license, that we are allowed to be amateurs. We're allowed not to be very good at what we do, but love it anyway. And we need more of that in our culture at large, because too much of our artistic culture has been professionalized, and people are marginalized from participation. You know, the daily, you know, you and me, we're marginalized from sports, from this, from that, because we've got professionals to do it, and we sit passively and watch them do it. Right. And there's something that really bothers me about that, because culture is a human activity. It's for everyone. It's part of what it means to be human and to make ourselves human. So I'm really a big proponent of, you have the right to be lousy at something you think you love to do. And do it, and, you know, lo and behold, you will get better. You will get better.
Well, and I think
if you put in
that's it, the
effort.
Exactly. You
I can't teach you to do that. I can't give you the effort. You have to have, someone has to come to me or to the Evergreen Haiku with the desire to try this out. And then my role basically is, to the extent that if someone says to me, well, I think we're going to quit, is to be supportive and say, don't quit now, don't quit.
No, and by the way, that's the thing you do the best, and you do it almost reflexively, is you don't let people get down on themselves. If I were to show you the poems that I've written that I wouldn't even send out to anyone, okay, you'd probably laugh. Okay, you couldn't help yourself. You'd say, I can't believe this guy's written 1,000 poems this bad. And that's what people.
I've done it myself. I've done it myself, Mike.
Yeah, I know. That's what you have. That's one of the things you have to teach people, is what you just got through saying, that you have to give yourself the license. You're not going to be successful. Lee Gerga doesn't publish everything he writes. When he submits, he doesn't win all the time. Michael Dillon Welsh doesn't. Nobody does. You don't. I don't. We send 10 poems in, and we get a kind note back that says, try again later.
Some of us go through runs where we get, sorry. I went through that very, maybe I shouldn't say which journal, but I was very disturbed. But then I realized, finally, well, I'm not sending them my best stuff, so what do I expect? Yeah. I was sort of misunderstanding, in a way, what they wanted. That's my problem, and I finally figured that out.
Yeah, and I think we all figure that out. It's almost an intuitive thing. Sometimes you realize, and it's the old thing, it's a golf analogy. I hate to do sports analogies, but this is a true one. It's people always study what's wrong with my swing. No. When you hit one 300 yards dead down the fairway, and you're there, and that's the one you want to say, what did I do right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm always surprised. By the way, you and Francine did it to me a couple of times. Mm-hmm. I would submit poems, and you would pick one that I didn't think was the best. And I wasn't wrong, and you were wrong. I had to learn what works in a certain journal or for a certain editor. We're all human beings.
Oh yeah, and that was, to me, that was especially when I was working on by myself, that was, I would, the last minute I would throw one in and they would pick that one. And I'm going, what? I slaved over these other ones, and they took the one that I just off the top of my head. And, but I learned something from that, basically, that the one off the top of my head it was more spontaneous, and it had that element of spontaneity to it. I guess I'll just be repetitive. Whereas the others became too labored or something, I'm not thinking of anything in particular. Just this happened to me enough times. I finally realized, well, I am a big reviser, but I have to be careful in the revising, not to get too far away from the experience. And there are things to look out for to make sure I don't go down some intellectual track instead of the sensual, remaining in the moment, the sensual moment. And that took me years to figure out, because of who I am. I have a tendency to be overly intellectual, and I have to work against that when I'm writing haiku. And I actually appreciate haiku because it brings out that other part of me, allows me to do that, because too much of one thing, is too much.
I say it all the time. I have no idea. I could give you some fun examples, but there are people, they'll contact me after a poem gets published, or they see it and they say, oh, you just spoke to me on this particular topic, not what I was writing about at all. Nothing. And I always say, yes, I'm glad you saw that in the poem. A lot of it, where people get into liking a poem of their own, is because you have 1,500 words behind it of your experience or relationship. If I write about my kids, my cat, my wife, it's a whole different deal, because I've I've got 50 years invested in my relationship with my wife. So it's
Yeah.
easy for me to see what I'm talking about. You might look at it and say, what's the topic here? And why did he write that? Is that what you're trying to say? Same type of thing over.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges in haiku is to be able to do that, to create, to find the two images. You know, you're going to look for two images, the background and the foreground, however you want to think about it, to find. Usually, it's in the, if you can construct the right background, then your reader can come in. But if you're like, if they just don't, that's the hard part, finding the right way of framing your moment so that other people say, oh yeah, okay, I have a place to come in to this poem. Because sometimes, yeah, if you're your own background, you know, you've got everything behind you, that's that iceberg, you know, that's all underground, all under the water. And someone else is like, I don't see any iceberg. There's nothing down there, you know. And so you have to, and that's the hard part. And the only way, I think the only way you learn what works and what doesn't work is by reading.
Yeah.
And what worked for me, how did this guy get me into his poem? And what comes back, and, you know, I mean, I don't want to put an emphasis on getting published, but that's one way you find out that, oh, this worked for somebody. They're willing to put it on and print it, or to go, or to have kukai, where you just share with others and you find out which of your poems other people really liked or don't like, or usually it's like, um, or some, but so that's the community aspect. You need to have some kind of back and forth with people to see what's working, and then you think, oh, okay, when I do it this way it works, when I do it this way it doesn't work.
Well, let's talk about Evergreen, because you've got a group of people there, and I started with them 5 years ago.
Good.
And so they had no understanding of haiku other than the most rudimentary, where you started and where I started. And you've now got people who are published, and you've published a chapbook of their work. I'm interested what you think about Evergreen and how the evolution occurred, because you're an excellent teacher. You're not overbearing, and there are plenty of them. Uh, you just it's a wonderful experience. I've never been bored in any of your presentations, and you have exercises and a plan, but you're always willing to go off the plan. And I talk to me about Evergreen and how that evolved, that concept, and where did you get your inspiration to teach and handle it the way you do so successfully?
Well, I guess it has two prongs, you know. If you had told me back in graduate school that I was a good teacher, I'd say, you haven't been in a class with me. I was not a natural teacher, and I did not know what to do, and I was frightened to death and all that stuff and whatever. Of course, it could have been the topic. It could have been what I was expected to do way back when. It was to be the, you know, the guru, or not a guru, but the sage on the stage telling people what, you know, lecturing. And that was not me. And so I was very disappointed because I thought I wanted to be a professor, a teacher, and I thought, I can't do this at all. So, but what happened subsequently, I mean, I didn't go into academia, but through the creativity studies, my husband and I wrote a book that got a lot of play. It's still in print, called Sparks of Genius. And we were asked, it's about various imaginative skills and how people put them together or not across the arts and sciences. Anyway, we were asked, for the last 20 years, we've been doing workshops mostly with teachers, but with other groups too, and going to psychology conferences and things, bringing this idea of the tools and doing workshops. We started doing a lot of workshops with each tool. And slowly but surely, I started figuring out a way of proceeding that worked with me was tough. It was tough at first. I had to write everything down because I couldn't read, that kind of thing. But I began to realize when I'm working with something that's a craft, that it was liberating to me, because you're no longer expected to be the sage on the stage. People use this language all the time, but a guide to the side. I could do that. I could do that. And I eventually, because of this, in a long story short, ended up working, becoming a teaching artist at the Kennedy Center. And so for years, I don't remember how many years, 10, 15 years, they would have an annual get together where they would basically train us in how to do workshops, but the kind of workshops that we're talking about, where you're guiding people and you're bringing out what they can do, rather than imposing, or you're certainly not lecturing, because they were all in the arts. They were all various things in the arts. So I learned a lot from that, and I had a chance over the many years to try things out with my husband in our workshops. And so that's the one part of the story. I got good at doing some kinds of teaching. And then, I was, when I met Francine, at my first mineral point or my second mineral point, whatever it was. And then she was offered the editorship of Frogpond. And she asked me out of the blue, she hardly knew who I was. I hardly knew who she was, but she asked me if I would help her with that and be a co-editor. So I said, of course, because wow, get to work with Francine, and who I thought was a terrific, and still is.
She is.
Terrific poet. It's so
In person.
She's like one of my mentors, as far as someone I would love to be, a poet I would love to be. So we worked on Frogpond, and I learned a tremendous amount. And I think we did that for 4 years. And when that was done, I thought, okay, well, maybe what I need to do is try to create a community that's local to Michigan. Because as I said before, I knew no poets in Michigan. Not that they weren't there, but they lived far away or whatever. So I thought maybe there's some way of creating a local community, and I was willing to try it out, because I felt comfortable now creating workshopy things. And so I gave it a go. And I didn't have any trouble convincing the Center for Poetry to support us. It's not really financial, it's just they give us a room.
Yeah.
And there is a little financial in there. Yeah. They've been very nice over the years for various things that we've tried to do. So that's how I got to trying out the Evergreen. And you're right, when we first started, it was open to students and anybody local, and anybody who wanted to drive 4 hours down from northern Michigan, if that's what they wanted to do. And so you came, and a couple of poets from Ann Arbor, Jennifer Bird and Laszlo Slomovitz, came almost from the start. And they drive about an hour and a half or whatever they drive. And I think Steve
Hodge.
Hmm?
Steve Hodge.
Yes,
he was editing Prune Juice.
He came initially, and he was driving, over an hour.
Yeah.
So I was, and a few other people came occasionally from a 1 or 2 hour distance, which really impressed me. I thought, oh, wow. But they helped, because those people usually were poets. They were already involved in haiku to some extent. And so that helped, because my local people were mostly people who had never tried to write haiku before, ever. And students,
But here's,
sorry.
To make the point you made prior, we all need that. Everybody, you need to have other people to feedback, to give you feedback, and to give you encouragement, and to give you guides. I will tell you, there's a half a dozen poems that went through Kukai at in your workshops that have been published in places like Modern Haiku and elsewhere. If I hadn't have gotten them honed, I don't think that it made it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wasn't happy with it.
Yeah. So I basically, with a Evergreen, I mean, what I feel like I'm doing is facilitating the learning curve. And everyone's on a different learning curve. Everyone's starting from a different point. So so you know, that's the hard part for me, is thinking, okay, I've got these beginners and I've got people more advanced. And so how do you do this? And so I just try to have enough information coming in, stimulus. People they'll take what they can absorb at that moment. And I'm very familiar with that. You know, you don't always absorb the most interesting thing. I mean, something that you might absorb is not what someone else might absorb from a bit of information. Like, you know, I'll usually pick a craft technique, something, and okay, this is what it is. This is how you think about it, or a way of thinking about it, and let's try it. And so everyone will be trying it on their own, you know, curve, and that's great. And then, so I try to do that. I try to also make sure everyone has an opportunity to read and to learn how to read a haiku, and how to respond to it, or not how to, but that
Yeah.
the first reading, you know, your first reading is not necessarily everything that's there. So listening to how other people are responding to it, you begin realizing the complexity and how to look for the complexity in the haiku. And I'm constantly learning too, because there's always something that I say, I didn't realize that was there. And it's always good to hear that, because then you can be more sensitive the next time you read something like that. And I
Well,
try to make opportunity for craft techniques and for people to try something out, and for sharing. That's really the secret sauce, you know, all that stuff in
if
one
people,
or 2 hours.
when people have an opportunity to see that other people go through the same things they're doing, doesn't matter whether you've been doing it 30 years or you've been doing it 3 weeks, you have the same problem every single time. And we struggle with it. People have this unrealistic thing. They say, you've been published hundreds of times, it's so easy for you. No.
No, if I could tell you how many times I announced to my husband that I will never write a good haiku again. He says, yeah, at this point, because he's heard it too many times. But it's true. It's
And it's the old thing, Suzuki Roshi's beginner's mind.
yeah.
In the mind of the expert, everything's settled, but in the beginner's mind, and that's what you have to keep. And by seeing and hearing other people's work and the things that they're going through, it's just like you said. You said it several times, and I just want to hammer it home to people. It's, you learn to say, Michele got away with this, I can too. You know, it's, and let's talk a little bit about where you, because you write haiku, senryu, haibun, haiga. You've dabbled in every corner of
Dabbled is a good word.
That's a
Because
good word for all of us.
yeah, it is a good word. Because I see a new form, I think, well, I ought to try it sometime. And I've tried a lot of different things. Yatsumonos, who's heard of those, you know, but I think they're kind of fun, but I don't write them routinely, but I've written some. And so it's always good to know what's out there, because sometimes something you want to say requires a different form or a longer form or whatever. But yeah, I've well, you know, haibun is like dear to my heart, although I don't write tons of them. But you know, one of the things I did write before I got into haiku, I wrote personal essays. I spent some time dabbling in personal essays. I thought this is for me, but then I realized not quite for me. I wasn't all that confessional in the way that was going on in the field at the time. So so when I discovered haiku and then I discovered haibun, I was like, oh, wow, haibun. But then I realized, no, the haibun doesn't work if the haiku isn't really, really good. So I was like, okay, I have to back up and really learn haiku. So I didn't write that many haibun, but I've had a lot of luck with them and I really do enjoy them. And I I wanted to say, if you want to know more about my haibun confessions, I have the next issue of Contemporary Haibun Online, which I think comes out in April.
Mhm.
Not sure exactly. Anyway, that issue I will be the featured writer, and I wrote a haibun confession, so you get to see what I think I'm trying to do. With
Well, that's the kind of the thing that people think about haibun, and is that it's you've got a title, you have a prose poem, and you have a haiku. And but I always tell people just exactly what you said. If there's no haiku, you don't have a haibun.
That's right.
It's sad.
That's my feeling. Yeah.
You may have a wonderful title that's snappy. You may have a great setup punch in the prose, but unfortunately, that's not what this particular form requires. It requires that you have that haiku or senryo that can take the reader to the next level. It's actually it's sort of like the old thing about salt in the soup. That's what the haiku is to a haibun.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think for haibun, I'm still operating on a, intuitive. I don't always know why something's worked, so it takes me. I have to let them sit a while. I'll write them, and I'll put them away for sometimes weeks or months, sometimes longer, before I understand what is missing or what it needs to do or what it's really about. Sometimes it takes me a long time to figure that out. So I don't write a lot of them, but I love them when they work. It's like the greatest creative high I ever have experienced, when everything clicks in and it's like, you just feel this rush through your body. It's like, wow, it works. So I really like haibun. I also have been lately working with Jennifer Bird and Les Lemovitz on renge, 3-person renge, and we're having a ball with that. Yeah.
Look, and renge, just to quickly make sure people are aware of it, it's named after Gary Gay.
Yeah.
In California, who came up with who invented this form. Michael Dillon Welsh, or Gene Murtha, there were several of them, got together and started to play. And it is a entirely Western form version of the kind of linked verse that came out of Japan 300 years ago. So, and that's another fun one, and that's another experience where you have just to nail it. It's this interaction with other poets. That's that's a big part of it.
I think what I'm getting at, what I love about it so much is, remembering that I'm kind of the intellectual brain. I've got too much, what is it, left brain or right brain going? I don't know it. What I get out of it is this. It's not that we write spontaneously. Well, it is a kind of spontaneous response. Although the way we've been doing it is online. I mean, we've been doing it by email, and we usually give each other. We get a verse, and then we have within a week. We've not really gone longer than that. You have to. You want to come up with a response, and somehow this process, the way it's working for us, and also who my collaborators are, it keeps me more in the moment, and is trying to find that sensual moment that will further the renge, because now you're not just writing something in isolation. You're trying you're trying it essentially at the end of the day. You're trying to write a story. You don't really know where it's going while you're writing it, but you're trying to create something that is like a story or is like a whole when you're done. And you just get to, with 3 persons, you get two chances to put in your say so or your understanding of what's happening. And anyway,
Well, I think
I really like it.
Yeah, it's a cool thing, and part of it, I mention this all the time to people. Bill Higginson is the one who hammered it home. He said, if you don't understand linking and shifting, you're not going to understand haiku, because haiku came out of linked verse. It didn't originate as a 17 syllable poem all by itself. The haiku, which was the starting verse, had to be broad enough that other people could link to it without copying it directly or staying. You're in Renge, you can move the topic all the way through. Is that, you have the
Well,
same
the nice thing
experience?
about the Renge, I mean, you can link and shift in the same way that you understand what the traditional Renku are doing, but you can also, the Renge is supposed to be thematic to a certain extent,
Right.
or can be, which is the Western thing. So you can continue linking to the theme and then just shifting away, shifting, but linking to the theme. So in a way, it might be easier for a Western mind, a Western poet, to understand what to do. And you can either sort of try to establish a theme before you get started, and then you kind of know what you're trying to do, which is what we've tended to do. I look at that as sort of setting a couple of constraints or parameters. I think it's easier to be creative when you kind of know what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
you can just go along and see what happens.
yeah. Well, and in Renku in Japan, they do start with a theme. They really had it rigid. It was a seasonal theme. Each one followed a seasonal theme. What Gary did was completely westernize it, and he did it well.
Yeah, no, it's a great
But
form.
I enjoy that form, and we'll put a link underneath here just to some articles about it, so people understand what you're getting into with Renge. Uh, what things are you working on now? What are things that you have in the hopper currently, if anything?
Well, the biggest thing, I guess, is that I have my first little collection of haiku will be coming out in the spring. It's almost spring, so I don't know when exactly. It will be an chapbook from the Snapshot Press. Me and a few other people won the chapbook awards for 2020. So, so I'm just thrilled. It's called Wind Rose, and it's only 24 haiku. So it's small. It's really small, but I'm eagerly looking forward to it, because once it's out, anybody can go to the Snapshot Press website and download. It's free. That's how he's been doing the Snapshot Press
We'll
chapbooks.
update this under YouTube and on Failed Haiku. We'll update when that comes out so that people can download it and see work, because it's fantastic. Yeah. And what do you want people to take away from this interview about you, about your work? What do you think the takeaway should be?
Well, I think the takeaway should be that, well, first of all, that haiku, the practice of haiku, if you want to call it that, because it is a kind of a practice. I mean, I do haiku every day, and I try to set aside time to be at the desk or wherever it is to receive what's there from my mind and the world, and put it together into haiku. So it's not that I generate good haiku every day, but I generate ideas and images and some language, and very early drafts of haiku. I try to do that every day, and so it can be a kind of a practice. So it's a way of, and also it's a way of living your life so that you pay attention. We didn't really talk about that, but it's the paying attention to the world in a way that I never used to. You'll look around me in the same way, or try to understand just what I was sensing, what I was feeling. So I really appreciate that, and it can become it can become a way of life to do that. So so there's that, and that practice can be multiply rewarding in so many different ways. So I would just say if that's suits you, or you think it suits you, just do it and follow the joy, you know, because it should be fun. It should be playful. You should be playing at it. Doesn't mean you can't be serious. I mean, there's a whole literature, and I've written about serious leisure, serious play. I mean, you can be very serious about it, but you can still be playful, experimental. Um,
There are serious issues in the world that impact. We talk about haiku being nature based. Well, that's environmental. Here, you can make those observations and 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 give people a feel for what's happening. And it's your life, you know.
yeah,
It's you're well, that's why you write every day. But there's one thing I want to say about you that you don't, because you're very you're I don't know, you don't want to say yourself. You are a person who has put back into the haiku community. You have done it with presentations everywhere. I know you say, well, everybody who knows you, Michele, knows that you give back. And every good haiku poet does that. That's why this community is so much fun, because people like you are there to inspire other people and make them feel good about their own work. And I can't tell you, watching uh, what you've done with Evergreen, uh, I've gotten to see firsthand how you deal with people, and you are beyond kind. You're extremely sharp when it comes to things. If people have expressed an issue in one meeting, I can pretty much guarantee in the next meeting you'll try and file that edge off. And that's something that good haiku poets do routinely, every single one of them. And you are one of the best.
well, thank you. You're making me blush.
That's intentional. You're phenomenal. And I also want to say, as a side light, I mean, you've had your group into your home. We've met your husband. I've met him a couple of times now, and yeah, he is an artist too. You glanced on that, but you're a good team together. And I have read Sparks of Genius, and I'm gonna put a link to it. People can buy it on Amazon if you're curious about what they have to say about creativity. That's a good book, and I want to thank you
Well,
because
thank you.
you're generous with your time, and you've been generous today with me. So you have it. Thank you, Michele.
You're very welcome.